But we're going to talk about the fall economic statement. We've got Goldie Hyder standing by because we did learn today that the country's deficit last fiscal year grew from $40 billion to more than $60 billion. That surpasses the government's own target, but this is mostly due to one-time expenses to settlements in certain Indigenous lawsuits. There is new spending in this update, about $24 billion worth, and that includes incentives for businesses to invest, as well as the GST holiday, and new money, of course, for securing the border. Goldie Hyder is the president and CEO of the Business Council of Canada, and he joins me now. Goldie, normally I go right to the productivity investments and the size of the deficit, but what does it mean for the business climate in the country that the finance minister quit the way she did on the day she did?
Well, let me just say that Minister Freeland's act today helps restore some faith, I think, in our politics, because it was truly unselfish and courageous. It is not every day that, I think her journalism skills were fully on display. It was a very pointed letter. It was an indictment of the government in which she served as the finance minister. And it is deeply disturbing to read some of the things. I don't normally read things on air, but I want to make sure I get the quotes right. But to suggest that this is about political gimmicks and that her own efforts to suggest that it's ill-afford, we can't do these gimmicks, that we have to keep our fiscal powder dry, something we've been saying for the last 5 years. And then to suggest that politics was really the driver here, not the best interests of Canadians, and it's a long quote to say that. This is not an everyday thing, and so I think what she's done is going to have repercussions. Now, having said that, one of the repercussions is there's a new finance minister, and so I want to obviously congratulate Minister LeBlanc. this is a serious time for our country. I was with premiers last night with some business leaders to talk about the tariffs that are, 5 weeks away. They're going to come. I think we have to be prepared for them. What are we going to do? And what you see in Canada, of course, is where you stand depends on where you sit. And so there's a lot of disparate points of view at the provincial level. We need the federal leadership. And so I'm hoping that whomever emerges with the U.S. file, because as some of these ministers have 4 or 5 jobs, it looks like, we need someone who's serious about leading this charge on what is the greatest economic threat to our country, far more even than the spending that this government managed to squeeze in this foul economic statement. Well,
I think you're going to have Dominic LeBlanc for a while, because the indications I'm getting today, Goldie, is that he is in finance for the long term. It's public safety that will be getting a new minister when that eventual cabinet shuffle happens. We'll see if that bears out to be true. But you said her journalism skills were on display today. What do you make of the finance minister skills Chrystia Freeland displayed, and what is her final fall economic statement? There is a larger than promised deficit in the last fiscal year because of a one-time settling of a contingent liability of a lawsuit. So not a structural thing. It does go on the debt, but it's not new structural spending, which I'm sure would have been more alarming for you. And there is a pretty significant investment there in the extension of the capital cost allowance write-off, essentially the acceleration of that for investing in equipment for businesses. What's your reaction to those moves?
Well, look, I've worked very closely with Minister Freeland going back to COVID, going back from the time that she was appointed, and I'll be candid. I love the fact that we had direct access. We had a good rapport. There were many things that we agreed on, but there were also many things we disagreed on, but nothing more specifically than the need for a disciplined fiscal anchor so that the government can set the framework in which the finances of this country, our public administration, our public finances, we as business leaders can know what we're dealing with, because we all know that when that gets run away, taxes follow, whether it's to businesses, whether it's to citizens or individuals or even consumption taxes. We know someone has to pay for all of this, David. And so I think what happened today is an indication, with all due respect, this is on her as much as it is on the Prime Minister, because that $40 billion was already there. Yeah. They would have known about the Indigenous. They would have known about some of the measures that they wanted to do. We have a government, by her own admission, that was spending a lot on gimmicks. Meanwhile, we've been saying, where's the investment in NATO? Where's the investment in our 2%? We made a commitment. Donald Trump's moving on to 3%, by the way. What are we going to be doing about this border? Why are we bringing in a capital gains measure? Why is it that we haven't acted on the digital services tax? I said the other day that this looks like a government that's literally turning over cushion covers and sofas to find whatever cash it can to pay for this spending. And so I'm hoping Minister LeBlanc, who once babysat the Prime Minister, I'm told, I hope he listened to him then, and I hope he listens to him now, because he didn't to the last 2 finance ministers, and that's why we're in the mess that we're in right now.
Well, look, to be fair to the now former finance minister, when Chrystia Freeland talks about costly political gimmicks, I'm not sure she's putting her measures on that. I interpret that to be a reference to the $250 affordability checks, which would have cost $4.8 billion. Just as a final point, those seem to be out of the fiscal framework. I don't know if they have a champion anymore. What's your reaction to that seemingly going away, Goldie?
Well, look, I mean, I can only say that I'm out of the political punditry business, but it seems odd to me to have explained to have informed the finance minister, you won't be finance minister on Friday, and telling her to read the statement on Monday. Maybe they underestimated her character, and I think they saw today that she was about to own it. Let's be clear. I think if she wasn't told that on Friday, she might be reading having read the fall economic statement. But to her credit, she did the right thing. The question now is, where do we go from here at a time in which Canadians are worried about affordability? The deficit has gone up by 50%. We've been warning about a rainy day. We've been saying that for a long time. Well, it's pouring. We've been using our credit card, maxed that out. Then we used our line of credit to pay down the credit card. We've maxed that out. We need to have a growth strategy, but it also includes finding savings in the size of our government. I don't know if this government in this state is going to have the courage to do that. And that's where I think premiers and public opinion more broadly may well turn to the need to clarify who's in charge of our country as we head into the most existential negotiations we've had in some time.
Goldie Hyder, President and CEO of the Business Council of Canada. Good to speak with you, sir. I'm sure we'll talk again in the coming days. On a day when we're talking a lot about a former head of the Bank of Canada, we happen to have a former head of the Bank of Canada standing by. No, not that one. It's David Dodge. He is with us, booked well in advance to join us to speak about the fall economic statement. But you know, David Dodge, you've held a lot of senior jobs in government. Have you ever seen anything quite like today?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining. No, I'm just kidding. Well, what do you make of today? I mean, the implications of the finance minister quitting on the day of the fall economic statement. I mean, what does that do inside the Department of Finance? What does that do inside the Bank of Canada? And what does that do on Bay Street, sir?
Well, first, the Department of Finance. I think that there's a general feeling in this town that the skills and background and ability of the folks in the Department of Finance have been totally overlooked or run over by PMO, by what is often referred to as the kids in short pants that really don't know what's going on. And so we've had a real drift in economic policy with a Minister of Finance, which is who has only been, I would say, half located in the Department of Finance and half elsewhere through the government, so that the great focus on economic development and financial stability that normally the Minister of Finance brings and the department brings has not been brought, certainly in the last couple of years in this government.
Do you think I want to get to the other institutions in just a second, but I'm wondering if you think that they did bring that focus in this particular fall economic statement. I know the deficit for the last fiscal year was higher because they had to settle some contingent liability issues related to lawsuits, which you would understand as one-time expenses rather than structural, but still going on top of large deficits.
But they're real.
They're real. Oh no, I'm not minimizing
they're
them.
Real.
But it's not like they launched yet another new national program to deliver benefits to people that was deficit finance, though they have those deficits there to deal with. But they did the big spending item. Beyond that, is this renewal of a tax incentive to let people do an accelerated write-off of business investments. That strikes me as something you would like, Mr. Dodge. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely. I liked it very much when Mr. Morneau brought it in. Very sad to see that it was going to die. And I think that extension is very valuable. What we really need in this country is more investment. And what better way to encourage that is to basically give firms that have retained earnings an incentive to reinvest those earnings rather than to distribute them to shareholders or bondholders.
Mm-hmm. So just back to the question I asked earlier. What is your thoughts on how the Bank of Canada is viewing this, and what is your thoughts on how the banks and the financial houses of the country are viewing this transition? They move fast. Dominic LeBlanc is in there. He's there for the long term. A signal of stability. Would that comfort those institutions, do you think, sir?
Well, it's a little bit of comfort in a very uncomfortable situation. We need leadership. We need leadership from the Government of Canada. We need leadership from the Minister of Finance, and turnover, especially unexpected turnover in this way, is in itself discomforting. We also have a history to live down, and that is a history of spending, which has been focused on not on helping uh, build a stronger economy, but rather focused on distributing what we are currently producing to back to people in a way that means that we will have slower economic growth in the future. So there's a history here of the last 3 or 4 years, a history which has to be lived down, and that's going to be difficult.
Well, look, I will confess, David Dodge, I did not have the benefit of going into the briefing lockup today to read the fall economic statement for obvious reasons, for anyone who's been watching TV all day. But it seems that they have resisted that urge to do a further redistribution, at least in this document. And sort of the argument we're getting is that is something we're told that Chrystia Freeland fought for and pushed for to try to get it back on this more productivity-focused agenda. And
Yes, and
go
that's
ahead.
extraordinarily welcome. I think that is a sign that we're beginning to move in that right direction. But there are a lot of things that need to be done. There are services that have to be delivered. And I think it's very interesting that the premiers are all saying that the federal government ought to spend money on the border, spend money on national defense, which I certainly agree with. But that really is going to be paid for by lower distributions of monies back to the provinces. If the federal government does what it's supposed to do, look after the national interest, then it's the provinces that are going to have to look after some of those other interests that the feds have been subsidizing them for in the past. So this is a very interesting dynamic at the moment as to what's going on. I hope and think that the pressures are to move essentially in the right direction to make the investments which will make us more productive in the future. But we've got a long way to go after the last 3 or 4 years.
So let's just talk, if we can, sir, about the deficit for the last fiscal year. That was projected to be $40.9 billion, I believe, $41 billion in round numbers. Now it's $61.9, $62 billion. The financial guardrails that were laid out last year, this was one of them. And, for the reason we explained earlier, the one-time settlement of that lawsuit, they blew through it. Where do you think the financial track of the country is right now? Because I know you've been highly critical of the deficit financing and investment on the redistribution rather than on growth and productivity, as you've outlined. But where do you think things are right now on the 16th of December, 2024, in terms of the overall financial health?
Well, first, I think it is important to emphasize that relative to a number of other countries, in particular our friends south of the border, but equally the United Kingdom or Japan, that on an international scale, we are not the worst performer by any stretch of the imagination. But every time we use our borrowing capacity to do something other than augment our capacity to produce more and raise incomes in the future, raise wages in the future. And I was very interested to see that that's the way they've phrased it in the economic statement. I think that's extraordinarily useful. The extent we borrow to do things other than make those investments, then we're on the wrong track. And we've borrowed a lot of money, and we're accounting for that in that big readjustment of last year's fiscal year, last fiscal year. But we borrowed a lot, which means that we have less room to borrow in the future, which means that we have to restrict ourselves to using that capacity to make those investments would raise our capacity to produce. And so I was encouraged at the direction in which this statement was moving. And undoubtedly, that was in large part the finance minister's doing, not PMO's.
I'm joined now by three economists to discuss these numbers and what's there. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm losing my voice after this day. Jimmy Jean is Vice President, Chief Economist, and Strategist at Desjardins Group. And here with me in the studio, Armin Yalnizyan, the Atkinson Fellow on the Future of Work, and Mustafa Askari, the Chief Economist at the University of Ottawa Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy. Okay, I think I've recovered my voice. Mustafa, let's start with you. I mean, the Liberals broke their deficit guardrail last year because of this one-time expense they had to account for. But, you know, a return to the more business-focused spending than we've seen in the past. What's your overall takeaway from what we saw today?
I think that was it. I think they wanted to show that there is going to be a pivot from consumption to investment. Whether this is enough or not, that's remains to be seen. Probably not enough. But I think their intention was that, and I think Peter actually summarized everything very well. There wasn't really anything else other than that in the document. That was the main thing. Now the $40 billion for 23-24 and the jump in that, most of that is the accounting, really. And it's something that they have to book. There is really no real spending right now. They may have to pay this later on. But there is no real spending. Yes, the debt will show higher, but it's not really borrowing. It's not necessary for money until they have to pay it.
It's not structural. I mean, essentially, they had this liability on their books that they were going to have to pay at some point, and it just got paid in that year, right?
And one of the things you see is that doesn't really show up in the following years because it is a one-time and it is an accounting. So it's not a spending in a normal sense. So in that sense, it doesn't really have much impact on anything, except for over time, once they borrow that money, they have to pay interest on it. That's
right. So, Armin, what's your thoughts? I mean, Chrystia Freeland has been a champion of supply-side economics, certainly in the past, something she talked about. But with the challenges from the U.S., she talked about the need to keep the powder dry and focus on growth and investment. Certainly in her resignation letter, that's what she said. What do you make of what her final act as minister was in this document today?
It's unclear who wrote the document. It's unclear if it's her document.
People around her are taking some credit for this one, saying that the measures in there are what she wanted, not necessarily what the Prime Minister wanted.
It's really unclear what it was that caused her to run, not walk from the file. However, to the point that this has been a business budget, mimicking very weakly some of the stuff that happened in the United States. It was fascinating to me that the Canadian dollar did not budge today. It was like a nothing burger for the market in terms of what's the response to the chaos politically and the Christmas present to business.
Right.
And it's also a Christmas present to whoever becomes the next government because of the fact that they booked this $20 billion extra accounting problem in the past. It's gone for the future, and the trajectory going forward based on the current forecasts is that the debt to GDP will fall, the deficit to GDP will fall, those two fiscal anchors will fall, and so will that magic number of the deficit that everybody is so focused on, which is irrelevant because it's how do you pay for the deficit, how is the economy growing. And I guess the last point I will make about this is that we are looking at a remarkable opportunity for any party to say, we are helping business. What are we doing for the affordability crisis? The feds have done quite a lot on housing.
Right.
They've done a lot on a number of things, but it sounds like, Minister Freeland used that keep our fiscal powder dry line in November of 2022 when inflation had already hit a 40-year high. And at what point do you actually use some of that fiscal powder to help not just business, but people that are really hurting?
Jimmy, what are your thoughts on what we saw here today? I mean, it's been a lot of population growth that has kind of kept the GDP above the recession line, though those immigration policies are being tightened up and reducing the number of non-permanent residents coming into Canada. Is there enough here to kind of keep things in the black? What are your thoughts?
Oh, I mean, it's going to be complicated because, yet again, what we see is that the government benefits from an upwardly revised GDP level. So, yes, we talked about that breach of one fiscal anchor, but the remaining the fiscal anchors is still they still hold largely because of that higher denominator in terms of the GDP. But it's a story we've seen before. When you had, for example, high inflation boosting nominal GDP, or you had similar revisions in the past. So it seems like any time you have some of those windfalls, the government is very quick to redistribute, to respend it. So we don't see any sort of benefit in terms of the trajectory for deficit to GDP or debt to GDP. In this case, I must say that indeed the investments that they're making in terms of prolonging the depreciation acceleration, I mean, those are good investments. We've been asking for that for a long time. The problem is that they come late. Those are investments that should have been made in 2 or 3 years ago, because now you're bumping against the threat of tariffs, which will lead businesses to hold back on investment, whereas you would have had much more runway if you had done those measures 2 or 3 years back, when really we were, at that time struggling with our investment and our productivity.
So Jimmy, I'm wondering what you make of what happens now? Sort of the question we've been asking all day. Like Dominic LeBlanc is making the move from public safety into finance. This path that has been charted, I don't know how much longer this one lasts, because the person who allegedly charted it is gone because of disagreements with the Prime Minister talking about costly political gimmicks, which I take to mean the $250 affordability checks, not necessarily the business investments that were here. But where do you think the fiscal path of the country is right now, and the economic path of the country is right now, as Parliament gets ready to rise for the Christmas holidays?
Well, it's the worst possible time to find yourself in the middle of a political crisis, because we have a new administration that will get sworn in the U.S. On January 20th. Donald Trump has posed some conditions under which tariffs, the 25% tariff for that, would be sort of waived.
Okay, I just want to give you.
Surely it has been addressed in this fiscal update, but still, this is something that if we don't have somebody who looks strong, and certainly I would say the Prime Minister is looking strong right now in the face of the U.S. administration, it has you wondering what's going to happen with those very delicate and so important negotiations.
Right. Okay, sorry for speaking over you there. You lagged for a second, and I thought you were done. I just want to let the audience know what's going on. Caucus is over. They have left. We are told the Prime Minister went out the back way, and presumably Chrystia Freeland did as well, because we did not see either of them come out. They did not stop and speak to anyone in the cameras. We have asked some Liberal MPs to come here. And we're going to extend the show past 7 o'clock Eastern, when we normally end, because we're counting on a couple of them to show up. So if you're watching and you accepted our invite earlier, it still stands. So please come here. We want to have you on. Ms. Safaskaria, I wonder, in her letter, Chrystia Freeland talks about costly political gimmicks and talks about that need to keep powder dry, which is something she said for a couple of years now, but seemed determined to do this time in the face of pressure from the Prime Minister's office based on the narrative we've seen. It doesn't look like there are costly political gimmicks in this document. Would you agree? Do you think it's the 250 checks? What's your assessment of it?
I don't think there's anything in this document. I don't think she resigned over what is in the document. I think there are other issues there, obviously. But the $250, I don't know if they don't mention it, so I think that's gone.
If it's not in the fiscal framework going forward, that sounds like the Finance Department had abandoned that idea. Do you agree? Yeah.
Yeah. Let me just say something about this idea of a low scenario and the 25% that Peter brought up. I think in finance, I'm sure they have done all the calculations internally. They know exactly what is going to happen. But for them to show that publicly is not actually appropriate for them. They don't want to show their card. They don't want to show exactly how they are going to react to this. So I didn't really expect them to show a low scenario based on that. I think it's the right thing to do at this stage until we know more about this.
But, we did see some analysis, Mustafa, done by people like Trevor Toome at the University of Calgary. That's right. Yeah. At 10% tariff is a half a percentage point to 5 full percentage points off the GDP. That's a blisteringly bad recession. 25% is a nightmare.
No,
right?
No, absolutely. Yeah. And I think private sector economists have every right to show that and those kind of analysis, and they're probably right. It's going to be significant. There is going to be significant impact on the Canadian economy and inflation and how we retaliate. All those things are there, but none of that that is certain right now.
Right.
It's just somebody has said something.
So, Armin, I wonder, on a day of changes, I mean, what do you think this signals about where this government may go? I mean, look, we don't know if the Prime Minister is going to be the Prime Minister. We know the Finance Minister is no longer the Finance Minister. What is your sense of, like, directionally what could emerge from this? Because you spent all day looking at this document. I don't know the shelf life of this one compared to past ones, because they've never really lasted very long. They change the minute the next budget comes along.
Well, this one has such a short lead time between now and the next budget anyway.
Yeah.
And to Mustafa's point, it's impossible to predict what is going to happen after January the 20th. You could not forecast this in a public document. And so, in an era of uncertitude now, both politically and economically, I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't think any of us here could say. I think it depends on whether the Liberals can marshal some kind of an answer to not only the fiscal guardrails of the public purse, but what is happening. The fiscal guardrails of many households are being blown past as well. People are losing money month after month after month, and not just the poorest. And so consequently, I think you're going to need to speak to that reality too, not just, how prudent the public purse is.
But Jimmy, and we'll end it on this, they do have this enormous challenge coming from the president-elect, and he's not even in office yet. I mean, there's the economic cost, the revenue cost, and whatever they may have to spend in response to it. So how do you even approach that kind of planning situation? You need contingencies, but we've never really kind of seen a contingency requirement like this one.
No, certainly. We've done the calculations. It's on our website as of last Thursday. But indeed, 25% tariff, and especially if that tariff were to be applied against Canada and Mexico and not be made universal against everybody, that would have devastating consequences for the Canadian economy. We would expect a recession in this situation, but also the Bank of Canada would cut interest rates, and we'd have a cheaper currency. So there would be some offsets, but certainly not full offsets. Look, I think for the government at this point, it's the time to be focused, to employ all the negotiating tactics. And we know that on this front, there's far from a united front on the part of provincial premiers and the government. They use the approach at the federal government level. So we're far from having something that instills confidence in our ability to really negotiate smartly, tactfully with the new incoming U.S. administration. I guess we're going to have some more details, some more information in the next few weeks. The concern I have is that, we're effectively right now in a position of weakness against the incoming U.S. administration that will be just very happy to apply tariffs and hurt the Canadian economy without a way to really prevent that would be effective if we weren't in that political situation.
Okay, Armin, one quick point you wanted to make?
To Jimmy's point, actually, Mr. Trump hates multilateral deals. He likes bilateral deals because he corners one person at a time.
Right.
And so I think there's going to be a huge pressure to break up the free trade agreement that is continental.
Jimmy Jean, Chief Economist, Vice President, Chief Economist and Strategist at Desjardins, Armin Yalnizyan, the Atkinson Fellow on the Future of Workers, and Mustafa Askari, the Chief Economist at the University of Ottawa Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy. Thank you. We've talked a lot on budget days and fall economic statement days. Never one like this, though. We'll see what happens with the budget if we get there. I want to thank you all very much for being here.